The Villarreal mansion stood like a monument to power, quiet, immaculate, and cold in a way that no amount of sunlight could soften. Its tall iron gates opened not just into wealth, but into a world where hierarchy was law and kindness was currency no one bothered to spend. Elena learned that on her very first day. She arrived before dawn, her shoes worn thin from years of walking roads that led nowhere permanent. The uniform they gave her was too stiff, too clean, too unfamiliar against her skin. It wasn't just clothing, it was a signal, a label, a reminder that inside those walls, she would no longer exist as a person with a past, but as a function with a purpose. Work began immediately. There was no tour, no welcome, just instructions. Polish the floors until you can see yourself, but never look at your reflection too long. Dust the shelves, but don't disturb anything. Speak only when spoken to. Move quietly, breathe quietly, exist quietly, and above all, never forget your place. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She had grown up understanding what it meant to be invisible. Poverty had a way of teaching that lesson early. But something about this house made invisibility feel heavier, like it wasn't just expected, but enforced. At the center of it all was Dona Isabella Villarreal. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone bent the air around her, commanding attention without effort. Every movement was precise, every word measured, every glance deliberate. She wasn't just respected, she was feared. Elena, she said on the second day, her voice smooth as silk and just as suffocating. A house like this runs on discipline, not emotion. If you have the latter, leave it outside the gates. Elena nodded, because what else was there to do? Days blurred into each other. Morning turned into night, night into morning again. Her hands grew rough, her feet ached constantly, and her back learned to bend without complaint. The other staff kept their distance, not out of unkindness, but out of survival. In that house, closeness was a risk. People disappeared quietly, not physically, but from schedules, from conversations, from existence. It was safer not to ask questions. It was safer not to care. And for a while, Elena succeeded. Until Adrian returned. He arrived one afternoon without warning, stepping out of a sleek black car like he belonged to a different world entirely, which, in truth, he did. Where the rest of the house moved in controlled silence, Adrian carried ease. Not arrogance, not exactly. Something softer, something that didn't quite match the rigid structure his mother had built. Elena noticed him the way one notices a change in weather, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. It started with small things. A glance that lingered a second too long. A quiet, thank you, when she served his coffee, something no one else ever said. A question, what's your name? She hesitated the first time he asked, unsure if it was a test. But when she answered, he repeated it like it mattered. Elena, and just like that, something shifted. Not in the house, but in her. Because in a place where she had been trained to disappear, being seen, even briefly, felt dangerous. And intoxicating. Their interactions remained brief, always on the edge of propriety. A few words exchanged in hallways. A shared silence in the kitchen when no one else was around. But even those small moments carried weight. Elena tried to ignore it. She told herself it meant nothing, that it couldn't mean anything. But loneliness has a way of rewriting logic. And kindness, no matter how small, can feel like something much bigger when you've gone without it for too long. One night, everything changed. The house was quieter than usual. Dona Isabella had retired early, and the other staff had finished their duties. Elena was in the study, organizing documents she didn't understand and didn't need to. Her hands moved automatically, her mind somewhere far away. Still working, she turned. Adrian stood at the doorway, his sleeves rolled up, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. You should rest, he said. I still have tasks to finish. He stepped inside, closing the distance between them in a way that made the air feel tighter. Not everything has to be done tonight. She didn't respond, because she didn't trust her voice. Because something in the way he was looking at her made it difficult to think clearly. That night was the first time they spoke without the weight of roles pressing down on them. The first time Elena laughed in that house. The first time she forgot, even briefly, that she didn't belong there. And it was also the first time she made a mistake she couldn't undo. Because what followed wasn't just a moment. It became a pattern. Late-night conversations turned into something deeper. Boundaries blurred, distance disappeared, and in the quiet corners of a house built on control, something fragile and forbidden began to grow. Elena knew it was wrong. Not because of rules, but because of reality. People like Adrian didn't build lives with people like her. They passed through them, and yet, she stayed. She hoped, and hope, she would later realize, was the most dangerous thing she allowed herself to feel. Weeks passed, then months, until one morning, everything changed again. But this time, there was no softness, no quiet understanding, just a realization that hit her all at once, like cold water poured over something still burning. She was pregnant. At first, she didn't panic. She told herself she would speak to Adrian, that he would understand, that whatever this was between them, however undefined, meant enough to face this together. But when she went looking for him, he was gone. No warning, no message, no trace, just absence. And absence, she would learn, can be louder than any rejection. The truth didn't take long to spread. Houses like the Villarreal estate didn't keep secrets, they circulated them. And when donor Isabella found out, there was no conversation, no doubt, no hesitation, only judgment. "You think this will secure your place here," she said, her voice calm in a way that made it even more terrifying. "You think you can climb your way into this family?" Elena shook her head, her hands trembling. "I didn't." Enough. One word. That was all it took. Within days, Elena's belongings, what little she had, were packed for her. Not by her, not even in front of her. Decisions were made around her, over her, without her. She was given an envelope. Cash, not help, not support, payment, for silence, for disappearance, for being erased. And just like that, the gates that once closed behind her as a worker, opened in front of her as someone being discarded. She stepped out with nothing but a small bag and a future she couldn't see clearly. Behind her, the mansion stood unchanged, untouched, unaffected, as if she had never been there at all. But inside her, everything had already begun to shift. Because this wasn't the end of Elena's story. It was the beginning of something no one in that house would ever expect. The world outside the Villarreal gates did not welcome Elena back gently. It swallowed her. The city moved the same way it always had, loud, impatient, indifferent, but to Elena, everything felt sharper now. The noise pressed harder against her ears. The heat lingered longer on her skin. Even the air felt heavier, like it demanded something from her she wasn't sure she could give. She walked for hours that first day. Not because she had somewhere to go, but because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. By nightfall, she found a room. If it could even be called that. It was a narrow space tucked between two aging buildings, with walls thin enough to hear strangers breathe and a single window that looked out onto nothing but concrete. The bed creaked, the sink leaked, and the ceiling bore stains from years of neglect. But it had a door. And for now, that was enough. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope from donor Isabella still clutched in her hand. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't want to, because opening it would mean accepting that everything she had gone through had a price. And worse, that someone else had decided what she was worth. Slowly, she peeled it open. The money inside was enough to survive for a few weeks. Maybe a month, if she was careful. It wasn't generosity, it was calculation, just enough to keep her quiet. Just enough to make sure she didn't come back. Elena stared at the bills for a long time before folding them back carefully, almost reverently, as if treating them with respect might make the situation feel less degrading. Then she placed her hand on her stomach. There was no movement yet, no sign of life she could feel. But she knew, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. Fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became direction. The first few weeks were about survival. Elena took whatever work she could find, cleaning, laundry, errands, jobs that paid little but demanded everything. She moved through unfamiliar streets with the same quiet efficiency she had learned in the mansion, but here, invisibility worked differently. In the Villarreal house, being unseen was expected. Out here, it was dangerous. People noticed vulnerability. They measured it. They tested it. And Elena learned quickly that kindness from strangers often came with conditions she couldn't afford to accept. So she adapted. She kept her head down, her answers short, her presence small. But inside, she was changing. Not in a dramatic, sudden way. But slowly, like steel being forged under pressure. The pregnancy made everything harder. Her body, once reliable and obedient, now demanded attention she couldn't ignore. There were mornings she woke up dizzy, afternoons where exhaustion hit without warning, nights where sleep refused to come at all. Still, she worked, because she didn't have a choice. Because every coin mattered. Because she was no longer just surviving for herself. And in the quiet moments, rare as they were, she spoke to the life growing inside her. Not out loud, but in thought. I don't know what I'm doing, but I won't fail you. It was during one of those long, exhausting days that Matteo found her. She didn't recognize him at first. Time had changed him, or maybe it was perspective. Back at the mansion, he had been part of the background, a driver who appeared when needed and disappeared just as quickly. But here, standing in front of her in the middle of a crowded street, he looked different, more defined, more intentional. Elena, her name sounded strange coming from someone who knew her from that world. She froze. Every instinct told her to walk away. Because the past had a way of dragging problems with it. And she couldn't afford more problems. I'm not here for them, Matteo said, as if reading her hesitation. I know what happened. She studied him carefully. People lied easily, especially when they had something to gain. What do you want? She asked. Matteo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around, then gestured toward a small cafe nearby. 5 minutes, he said. If you still want me gone after that, I'll disappear. Elena hesitated, then nodded, because 5 minutes felt like something she could control. The cafe was quiet, not elegant, not memorable, which made it perfect for conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. Matteo didn't waste time. They paid me to keep an eye on you. The words landed without warning. Elena stiffened. I knew it, she said quietly. This is about making sure I stay gone. Matteo shook his head. That's what it was supposed to be. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. But I didn't report back. Elena's eyes narrowed. Why? It was a simple question. But it carried weight. Because motives mattered. Because trust was expensive, and she couldn't afford to spend it carelessly. Matteo met her gaze evenly. Because I've worked for them long enough to know what they do to people who can't fight back. He paused. And I don't think you're one of those people. Elena didn't respond, but something in his tone, not pity, not sympathy, but recognition, made her listen. I've been watching, he continued. Not for them, for myself. That's not comforting, she said. It's not supposed to be, he replied. It's honest. There was a brief silence. Then, I can help you, Matteo said. Elena almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because she had heard those words before, and they had cost her everything. I don't need help, she said. Matteo nodded. I know. He leaned back, studying her with a kind of calm that didn't feel intrusive. That's why you'll listen. She didn't, at least, not immediately. But she didn't leave either. And sometimes, that's how everything begins. Matteo didn't offer charity. He offered perspective. You're thinking day to day, he said. That's survival. Elena crossed her arms. That's reality. It is, he agreed. But it's also a trap. She frowned slightly. Explain. He did. Not with grand speeches. Not with promises. But with something far more dangerous. Possibility. There are systems, he said. Supply chains. Small businesses that don't look like much but move money quietly. People who need someone reliable more than they need someone educated. Elena listened despite herself. Why me? Matteo's answer came without hesitation. Because you've already learned discipline most people never will. He gestured toward her hands. Because you know how to work without being told. Then, more quietly, because you have a reason to keep going. Elena looked down at her stomach instinctively. And in that moment, something clicked. The shift wasn't immediate. Elena didn't suddenly become someone else. She was still tired, still cautious, still carrying more weight than she should. But now, there was direction. Matteo introduced her to small opportunities. Nothing glamorous, nothing easy, but different. Instead of just working for money, she started understanding how money moved, how goods were sourced, how prices changed, how people negotiated. At first, she made mistakes. Trusted the wrong people, accepted bad deals, lost small amounts that felt big at the time. But she learned, fast, because failure, she realized, was only permanent if you stopped paying attention. Months passed, her body changed, her mind sharpened, and the version of Elena that once walked quietly through the Villarreal mansion began to disappear. When Mira was born, it wasn't in comfort. It wasn't in safety, but it was in strength. Elena held her daughter for the first time with hands that had known exhaustion, rejection, and relentless effort. And yet, they didn't shake. Because this time, she wasn't being thrown out of a life. She was building one, from nothing, from pain, from everything they thought would break her. That night, as Mira slept beside her, Elena stared at the ceiling of that small, imperfect room. And for the first time since she had been cast out, she didn't feel lost. She felt something else. Not hope, not yet. Something stronger, something quieter, something more dangerous. Resolve, because somewhere deep inside her, a realization had taken root. She didn't just want to survive anymore. She wanted more, not out of greed, but out of memory, out of everything that had been taken from her, and everything she refused to lose again. The Villarreal family thought they had ended her story. They thought they had erased her, reduced her to something temporary, forgettable, disposable, but they were wrong, because while they continued living in comfort, unaware, unchanged, Elena was becoming something they had never prepared for. Not a victim, not a mistake, but a force, and one day, they would feel the consequences of that mistake. Follow for part 2.